so you can see this is kind of rough. This isn't going to be like a slideshow presentation. I'm going to focus on code. And because of that, it'll be a little bit freeform. If anybody has questions about the project, any tools I'm using, a correction, a suggestion on another AI tool, feel free to interrupt or just shout it out, raise your hand. I may not see you because I'll be focused here. I think there's so many AI tools right now that my hope is just you might see a different one that you haven't used yet or a different way to use it. And for that reason, I want to hear what you are using, how you're thinking about these things. So let me jump in. So I'm using Windsurf. I don't like Cursor. I guess I'm the only one who uses this, but I use this I use Command K to clear my terminal, and then I use Shift Command K to clear lines. And Cursor just hijacked those commands and took it for AI, and like I haven't figured out how to switch them, so it never worked for me. Windsurf just works really, really well, and so I just haven't looked back. It's the same thing. It's a VS Code fork, so very similar. Some people have said that their implementation of Claude 3.7 is better than Cursor. That's a big deal to me. I really, really like Claude. So the package we're working in today, I've been working on a style guide. I love eslint and prettier. I don't know why. It's just been like something I really like. I like hitting Command Save, and all my code just looks pretty. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it ever again. So I have a pretty strict setup, and it's like I set it up in every project, and it ends up slightly different every time. So I was like, I just need to make this and abstract it for myself, and I'm hoping that other people find use in it too. And along the way, I found some like cool things about it. So I'll briefly show it. If you have questions about it, feel free to ask. But I'm mostly showing off the workflows. So the goal here is that instead of like a prettier file and an eslint file, you just have this style kit file. This is what the project's called, is JS style kit. And you'll just have the style kit file, and eventually this will just be one function. It'll be like style kit config. And you just tell me about your project in like an object. You'll tell me like, okay, I'm using TypeScript, I'm using React, I'm using Next, this is my testing library, and then it'll just return all the tools you need. So eventually it'll be more like, it's going to scream at me for this, but I want it to be more like this. So yeah, it's kind of catching on. So I want it to be more like this. And then you can add a VS Code setting to hide the eslint and prettier configs, and then you just export it and re-export it. So prettier and eslint see the same thing, but you only have to mess with one file. Because that's one of the biggest pain points to me, like that I see when people mess with eslint prettier. They don't give a shit about it, so they just want it to work. And it's really hard to get them to work together. That's why like eslint config prettier exists. It just turns off a bunch of rules that conflict with prettier. And it really affects, it's not ideal, it affects performance. So this package would take care of it for you. So if you're setting up a new project, please install JS style kit and tell me what you think. I need people to use it, break it, tell me what sucks about it, make it work. The goal is for it to be relatively low, like config. So what else is going on here? I'm using Turborepo. Probably overkill for this project. It's a mono repo manager. But I wanted to learn how it works. It's really, really nice for caching. So if I go to my terminal and run the build command, it's easy. The first time, it's actually running the build fully. And then the second time, if I run it again, it's going to be cached, or it should be. It took 100 milliseconds, it just flashed. What's really cool about this is a remote cache. So if you were working with teammates elsewhere, they could share the cache if they built on the same key. Or if I push this to CI right after running it to test it locally, it would use the cache version on CI, which is what's really cool. Makes it really fast. Again, overkill for this project, but I wanted to learn about it. So what I want to do here is we're just going to build a feature into here with Windsurf. We're going to push to GitHub, go over the CI tools, the AI tools I'm using, get it all the way to NPM, and just kind of see what that looks like. This is the first project I've ever published in NPM, so that's been kind of fun for me to just learn how like the ins and outs of the package work. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the project at this point? Any comments? Okay, cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a prettier plugin called prettier plugin curly. Oops. I just started using raycast like hotkeys. I'm getting used to them, so forgive me. Okay, so prettier plugin curly. All it does is this zoomed in enough? All it does is add curly brackets around your if statements, your control statements. So instead of having like a single line, the kind of shorthand like this, it just adds the curly brackets. And this is the kind of stuff I really want to add to my package because I don't want, when I'm using AI to generate my code, I want it to be spit out the exact same way every time. And so the things about like, oh, should I use curly brackets on this or not? Because it's just a really short control statement. I don't want to ever think about that again. I just want to apply and be done. So this is the kind of thing that I want in my package. So let's go back to Windsurf. We're just going to ask AI to add that in for us. Let me show you what it looks like now. So in this packages / style kit, this package is what gets pushed up to NVM. And here there's like a split up of eslint prettier, and in the index file here, is this zoomed in enough? Can everyone see okay? Yeah. Okay, cool. So we've got some types, some imports, some JSDoc. But basically, you just pass an object here, and I have a few plugins set up. I have Tailwind, a JSON sort plugin, package JSON plugin, sorts your package JSON the same way every time, and then a CSS order. And you just turn those on and off, and then the rest is any prettier configurations you add. So if you want to change your tab width, your quotes, whatever, you just pass it into the same object, and it works that way. So it looks like, go back over here. If I wanted to change something, I could just do tab width right in line here. I could turn off the CSS order plugin if I don't want that, and it just works like that. And so we're just going to add in the prettier plugin curly as a default, and it'll get added in here. You see, like if one of those booleans is true, it just adds in the plugin to the list, and we'll have to add it as a dependency as well. So I'm just going to ask Clyde to do it for the Windsurf, and see how close it gets. So let me type out this prompt real quick. Does anyone else use Windsurf, or is everyone using Cursor? It seems like everyone's using Cursor. No one's using Windsurf. Okay, cool. So this is a lot of pressure on me to show that it's good. Okay, so we're going to add prettier plugin curly to our prettier config in. And this is where I like to really be specific with my prompts because I don't want to waste my time. So you can do, I think Cursor works the same way. You can do an @ and then type in a file name and attach it so it knows where to start. Index, okay, it's the prettier one right here. And for some packages, you can actually go to, you see I have this menu here. I can actually go to docs and add some really popular documentation. So if I wanted to add a complicated next feature, I could actually attach the Next.js docs here. I'm using Bun, I could attach that. I think I'm trying out Mentlify for docs, and I believe that's in here too. I'll see right now, but anyway, also what we can do is I'm going to go back over to here, and I'm just going to copy. This is a very simple plugin, but even if it was pretty long, it's just a text file. So I'm just going to copy this and just paste it into my project really quick. So over here, let's do it at the root. Do prettier plugin curly. Not spelled curly today. Markdown, and I'll paste this in, and we'll delete this after this prompt is done. And I'll instruct it to use those docs. So use the docs at prettier plugin Turley. Make sure you add tests and documentation at README. Because this is a monorepo, there's a few READMEs, so I want to make sure it's using the correct one. Style kit, because that's the one that gets published npm. And I'm going to use the thinking model. They're both good. Thinking one's a little bit more thorough. For simple things, the regular model's great. I already said I'm a huge Claude fan, so I just use Claude and don't worry about anything else. Let me see what happens. So they put a decent amount of the thought process in here. I listened to a podcast recently with Guillermo Roche, who's the CEO of Vercel, and he talked about when they were making Vercel, how they were trying to figure out how much of the thinking to display as after you do a prompt. And they said that if you put all of it, it just looks like a crazy person talking to itself. So they made it a lot simpler. I think Windsurf did a decent idea. It it kind of gives me its strategy. Here's what I'll need to do, these 5 things. I'll help you do this. Then it wastes a lot of time like telling me that it's going to go look here and see what it does. But it's kind of reassuring because I just give it a couple, like I gave it the index file, and I'm expecting it to come up with the context of like, here's the format I'm using, here's the types I'm using, and I'm going to try to do it the same way. Here's the tests that are running it. So I mentioned the documentation file, I didn't mention the test file, so we're going to have to assume that it can figure it out. It does take into account any files you have open, so you don't have to tag those. But in a particularly big repo, you're going to want to tag like the relevant files just to save yourself time. Like if I were to use this at like my work, I work in a monorepo with like 50 apps. So if I were to use this, we're not allowed to use this, of course. But if I were to use this, I would have to be very specific. And that's where honestly using the Claude web interface is kind of really nice for big repos because they only attach a couple files to get some information. And you see it actually it not only generated tests, it must run them for me. So let's see what happens. And I'm actually kind of impressed. It figured out that I'm using Bun for tests. So I'm curious to see what happens. And it looks like, okay, almost all the tests failed. And now it's stalled. See, the prompt's still going. So it's going to try to fix the failing tests. And this we're going to dive into what it does to fix the failing test, because if you're not careful, sometimes it will just cheat your code to fix the failing test. Yeah.
Do you have configuration already that like project level configuration that instructs it to test its code?
No, I didn't mention that. So when I tested this earlier, it did not try to run the test command. I actually prefer that it doesn't because I kind of at that point I kind of want to get my hands on it and see what it does. But I wanted to see what happened here. And one thing cool that Windsurf is doing now is, I think Cursor does the same thing. It will actually correct lint rules too. So it will generate code, check your lint. If it's wrong, it'll fix it. And that's part of the reason I'm sort of arguing for a very strict or opinionated lint config, because you can have AI make sure that it generates what you want. So for instance, I have a plugin in my lint config in this package to enforce your function style. So you set, like by default, it's arrow functions. I just prefer arrow functions. I don't care about hoisting. So it will notice that I prefer arrow functions and convert them all to arrow functions before I have to look at it. And at least in Windsurf, they don't charge you a credit when it has to correct something. I was going to see if it does that here. It looks like, okay, it does charge me credits for failing tests, so there's that. Okay, it wants to run it again. Let's see what happens. So you were talking about like cursor rules kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and that, I can't remember what Windsurf does.
Yeah, they call it Windsurf rules. I'm kind of hoping that they unify on some like rules directory, because it's going to be really annoying if they're just competing for a lot one time, and then some companies, like if you go to the Next.js repo, I just submitted a PR to the Next.js repo, they have cursor rules in there. So Windsurf doesn't care about those. It can see them. I mean, you could just tag it and be like, hey, well, check out these cursor rules. It'd be the same thing, just talking to an LLM with a different prompt. But yeah, I have also seen people just do a .rules directory, and then you can just tag it and make it, make it pay attention to that no matter what IDE you're using. Yeah.
When you say credit, is that just referring to like your payment plan?
Yeah. So we can just go here. It will show anything too personal. So I did they have a pretty generous trial, so I did that at first, but this plan is like $15. And so you can see you get a certain amount of credits. And Claude is notoriously expensive, so it's like 1 credit per, and then the thinking is 1.25 credits per. But like I've been using this a decent amount since March 8th, and I'm using like 10% of my credits. So it's like it's not a big deal. I don't think it's as expensive as Claude Code, which is the new terminal one. You have to actually hook up an API and pay for everything. So I just don't see it as an issue. And even if I max this out in a month and have to pay for extra credits, I feel like it's worth it, But that's what I mean by credit. So, but I think it's pretty cool how Windsurf will tell you when it's using credits and for what. Okay, so we ran the test again. It says they're passing. Let's see what code it actually generated here for us. Okay, so it added a curly plugin to the interface, added some documentation for it. It's great. I really like when my JS doc works because when I have a function, I want the developer to see how to use it immediately. It added a default. Okay, this time it defaulted to true, which is cool. Earlier when I tested it, defaulted false. It added a plugin. So all that should work just fine. It did not install a package. All the files it changed will open in tabs, by the way, so there's not like any hidden anything. So I'm going to keep all these changes like that. Tests. Okay, so it's checking to see that this gets entered by default. Cool. Way down here, it added 2 tests. It adds it by default. It's kind of the same test again, and then it makes sure that you can disable it, which makes sense. That's kind of exactly what I would hope for there. Let's make sure that the tests are actually working as expected. I am using bun test for this. If you've never, I'm going to run it directly in the directory. If you've never used bun test, it is like stupid fast. Just watch this. That was 82 tests in like not even 1 second. Just boom, it's done. It's that just blows my mind. It's a little bit. It's for their APIs. They try to line up exactly with Jest, which is pretty cool. It's a little bit more complicated to use like React testing library. I still use vtest for that, but since this is all node tests, I wanted to try bun, and it's super fast. It almost like the Turborepo cache almost slows it down compared to how fast bun runs it just naturally. Okay, so this is one thing I want to talk about is how to make sure that your AI generated tests are actually useful. So this is a very simple feature. It's a Boolean, it's on off. But I think it's really important because one of the ways we can kind of distinguish ourselves as really good AI engineers is by making sure that our code quality is good. So that's part of why I'm making the style kit. And I think that you should take some time to make sure your tests are good. It's really useful because you only have to make sure your tests are good once and then you're done. I think it's kind of dangerous. This is partly why I don't really care if AI is running tests, because I don't care if AI can make tests pass, because you will see it do some shady stuff to make tests pass. It is trying to make tests pass. It's not trying to make your software good. So you are still responsible for the time being at making sure your tests are actually useful. Now, in a simple feature like this, it only needed to add 2 tests, so it's pretty easy to double check. But I think it's really important when you're making these features, just take a few minutes make sure your tests are good. I don't think that's just reading it. I'm not a very good tester. I don't like reading tests. Some people are. More power to you. But one thing I do know how to do is break tests, and that's one way we can make sure our tests are good. I saw a tweet once that was just said, you can only never trust a test that you've never seen fail. And I think that's really smart because if, like we just saw, those tests passed, and we don't actually know what they did yet. I mean, obviously we can read them, it's 2 lines of code, but some of them are more complicated. And the only way we can be sure that they're testing anything useful is by making sure they fail. So that we can do very simply. So let's just start with, there's 2 tests here, we can do that really quick. So it should include the curly plugin by default. That's really easy to test. So we'll go over here and we'll just make this false. So it doesn't include the curly plugin by default. And we'll go run our test and it should fail. We should expect that. So I'm going to run the specific one. I can't remember where it is. Here, index. Just going to run that file and we got a failure. So expected to contain, we got 2 failures, which is what we expect. So that first one where it's checking the whole array of plugins, and then the second one where we just did, which is exactly what we were hoping for. If we had the v-test, if we were using v-test, you can do it with the extension where it has the little green dots here. It's nice to see which blocks of code are failing. I don't think Fun has a VS Code extension for testing, which is fine. Okay, so I feel pretty good about that test. I will just turn it back on, and then should disable plugin curly plugin when specified. Okay, so let's do this. Put that back. Okay, so to test this one, I basically just need to take out the parameter, I guess, so that it doesn't even add it. Because if I do, or I guess I can just, no, I'll do this. I will go, where did I add it? I'll just take out the if statement so it adds it no matter what. And go back to the terminal and run that test. And it failed. So we have 1 failure. It's probably not zoomed in very good. We have 1 failure instead of 2. So those 2 other tests that we failed the last time are good. Actually, no. This is the first test that's failing. Oh no, that's the right one. Yeah. Okay, cool. It's showing me the whole array of plugins that I got. It's expected not to contain the plugin curly, and it did. You can see that right here. So okay, cool. I feel pretty good about those tests now. Like knowing that I saw them fail for the reasons I expected them to fail. Now I never have to think about this again. I can push code, whatever, and it will always make sure that this AI feature was good for me. Okay, so one thing we need to do is, oh, this is adding documentation. Let's see how we did there. It's just adding a note about the new parameter. That's good. Okay, so this is cool. You can see for the other like plugins I noted, I think this was something I generated. It's like very like just a 1-sentence thing about the CSS order plugin. Because I tagged the curly documentation directly, it actually copy pasted directly from it, which I think is pretty cool. It's definitely a benefit there, even though it was like a very simple markdown file. That was pretty useful. And this is the right markdown. Okay, cool. All right, so now let's push this up. We'll check out my CI and then how I review code with AI. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Go for it.
On the testing subject, I totally agree. I like the idea of like seeing the test fail. Have you considered using like TDD in this approach?
Like writing the test first?
Right, yeah.
No, I like the idea of TDD. I've just never liked it in practice. Part of it's probably just my ADD brain. I just want to do shit. I don't like, don't slow me down, man. And I feel like I think you should only slow yourself down a little bit. Like we have to find balance because the main thing that this AI thing gives us is speed. We can go so fast now, and that's great. Going fast is great. But we want to we can take just a few minutes to make sure that things are decent. Because if I do TDD, I'm still going to do it with AI. But I guess to your point, you could be like, hey, generate 10 tests for this feature I want to build. Obviously, they're all going to fail right off the bat. Then I can generate the feature. And so that would be a little bit nicer than manually writing out 10 tests for a feature that I really just want to build. So I think that'd be cool to experiment with, honestly. Have you tried that with AI?
Yeah, that's what I've been doing because it's like I have that kind of same thing where it's like I feel like you hit this point where you're going back to break the test, but if you start with the test, it's immediately breaking, right? So you get that like sanity validation.
Sure. Yeah, I mean that would be really useful in Windsurf because instead of in that same prompt, Claude generating tests for a feature it just wrote, it would have to match tests that were already written. So yeah, that's pretty valid. I'll have to try that. Okay, so I'm going to. Oh, you had a question?
Well, I may have missed or zoned out or something, but did you say that you needed to add in a dependency?
I do. Yes, thank you. Do you have a question?
No.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I do. Because I actually want to make sure it works locally first. I think it would. Probably something I need to do because I don't know if I have a CI check to make sure that that plugin even exists. Or just to run the prettier configuration at some point. We can do that real quick. Okay, so I'm already in the StyleKit folder. The way it works with fun workspaces, it's easier just to go into the folder specifically and add a dependency. I have some aliases set up. I'm sure many of you have done this. I find this so incredibly useful. I just set up basic aliases for every package manager. So NI is npmi, nu is npm-un, and there's pnpm, and then I don't use yarn ever anymore, but way up here is bun as well. So bad, it's bun add, develop dependency, etc. But actually don't want to use that. I want to add this as a direct dependency. So for me, it's BA, prettier, plugin, curly. Good, so that's good. And I create a new branch. Let's go back up to the root. Git add all. So what I'm going to use for code review is this tool called Coderabbit. It's free for public repos for open source projects, so it's super handy. I have found that if your commit messages are useful, it does a better job of understanding what you're trying to do. No surprise there, because it makes that. I don't have a commitment set up for a specific format, but I do generally find that standard kind of config or commit message is pretty useful. So feet prettier, I will add prettier plugin curly. That's good enough. Just close that out. And to test this, all we need to do is build it. Bun run build. I use tsup, by the way. If you've never built a package, tsup is, I think, relatively new. It's at least relatively new, popular. It's TypeScript building on top of rollup. It takes care of the shipping with types, ESM, CJS, just instantly. You never have to worry about how your package is output. It just does it immediately. If you're building an NPM package, just use that. Don't ever think about anything else. There's a lot of older projects actually in doing this. That's one of the cool things about building an NPM project. I would definitely give that as a tip to anyone, any juniors looking for a job. Build an open source package NPM, even if it already exists, because by doing that, I'm depending on other projects, and that's what it tells me what other projects are lacking and where I can contribute to open source. And contributing to open source PRs are a really good way to add your resume because it gives your hiring manager a preview into your work. 3 open source PRs, including one to Next.js, just making this project. Okay, so where was I? Oh, we need to test this. So let me just go into any file. When I built it, the dist version is what I use in the project directly. So once it's rebuilt, it should be good. I can just reload the window to be sure. Let's do an if statement. Thank you. Thank you. If something that works. Thank you, AI. I'll just do this true. And if I save, okay, that's exactly what we wanted. So it ignore AI and this error nonsense. That's what that plugin does. Is it takes a one-liner control statement, wraps it in brackets, and then now it's the same way, and you never have to think about it again. So that plugin is working, and now we're going to submit a PR for it and do a change log. So we want to do a change log on, well, ideally we would have done on the same commit. The way I have releases set up right now, I list the commit, not the PR. You can change that. But we're going to do a bump. So the package I'm using to do bumps is change sets. Or just change set. It's great. It's kind of highlighted as managing mono repos, but it's just good for any project. The way it works is I aliased it to bump because that's what my company does. I couldn't remember if it's change set or change sets, so I just did bump and both of it. The way it works is when you bump it, it creates a random markdown file, and then we'll submit a PR, and when we merge that PR, it'll show us how to release that. I'll walk through that in a second. So let me bump it real quick from the root. So we select change packages. This is where like a mono repo situation works. I don't know why it sees this TypeScript config as a package. Doesn't matter. We're going to select JS style kit with spacebar, hit enter, ask if we want to do a major. No, skip that. Let's skip a minor. Just do a patch, and then I'll do the same kind of thing. Add prettier, plug in curly to prettier config by default. All right, that's good. Is that your desired change set true? Okay, so we can go see what it added. It just added this vast women marry markdown. It just adds like a throwaway markdown with a patch and your release notes. So that's all we need. I'm just going to add a bump here and publish my branch. I'm going to go ahead and create the pull rest. So for Coderabbit, if you add in this syntax here, Coderabbit AI, it will if you add Coderabbit AI to the title, it will name your title for you. And if you leave the description empty, it will do your description for you, which I find just super handy. I think it's actually better to name your title because you'll see in a minute the title's probably going to be kind of very AI slop kind of. If you give it a descriptive title, it ends up giving you a better review. And I find that really useful. It's nice since this is a solo project, I still submit PRs just for this reason. Just it catches like really stupid stuff. And actually, I should have broken something just to see if it'll catch it. Maybe we can still do that. I'll show what it does initially. So I have a few bots set up on the GitHub side. So change set has their own bot, which shows up first, and it just tells me if I did a change set. So usually I forget to bump it, and it will tell me right here that there's no change set detected. And if there's no change set, then the way I have it set up, it will never get published. So it reminds me to do that. This is where Coderabbit writes me a poem as I'm waiting for it. And you can see I'm like the Meetup deployment, it skips, caches naturally. Let me go to the CI thing because I think that's pretty. I spent like it broke it. Okay, well that's kind of cool actually, so you can see what we did. Okay, I spent way too much time optimizing the CI for this to get to make it like 10 seconds faster. Basically, I set up a cache with fun, and then I set up the Turborepo cache. I think for a free account, you can get a free Turbo cache on Vercel. You can also host it yourself, but it's pretty handy to set up in here because that's when you get like where it can cache some of the things that I already ran locally. So you can see here, and it doesn't like my markdown. That's hilarious. Yeah, it's funny. I just added a markdown lens, and I bet it's flagging the. I bet I forgot to ignore the chain sets folder on that. Let me see. I can't remember what command it did. Okay, that was it. Yeah. Here, exit code 1. Oh, that actually is very useful. That it doesn't like the docs I added. So I don't want to commit this docs that I added earlier. I should probably put that in a get ignored folder. But that was pretty useful. It didn't like the thing I did. Okay, but this helps me. I want to break Coderabbit while we're at it. So let me go to the docs on these style kits. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say in the docs that it's disabled by default, that plugin we added. We know it's enabled by default, and I just want to see if Coderabbit will catch that. So let's add that. I'm just going to say that I fixed markdown and push that up. Okay, so there was a pull. That's interesting. So that means it probably, I have it set up to format. Okay, so this is actually why I'm bringing this up. I was debating on whether to allow GitHub Actions to commit prettier formatting changes in the GitHub action. And as I was talking to myself about it, I convinced myself to do it. So I set that up. One of the things that sucks about it is it will commit code while I was correcting something, and then mess up the Git flow in that way. But it's kind of useful because sometimes I have AI generated code that I haven't gone and hit save on, so I can just have GitHub Actions run prettier for me. I guess that's kind of a little bit of a trade-off there. Okay. Anyways, let's go back up to our next action and see what happens. Ignore that one. Okay, so you can see Coderabbit already gave us a title. Integrate prettier plugin curly into JS style Git configuration. That's pretty accurate. If I were to write that, I would have just said add prettier plugin curly. A little bit less to read, but it's still helpful. Okay, so let me go to my CI file just to show it off. I will share this repo in the Meetup chat later if you want to copy this. Please feel free. Most of this is AI generated anyways. You can kind of see the steps I go through. I have like 5 or 6 things that I really actually care about. Most of this is just setting up the cache, installing dependencies. The checks that I'm doing is because I'm in a monorepo, I run the sheriff check, make sure that I'm using the same version of packages in multiple places. Running the build, that also does my type checking. I'm running format, you can see I'm running it with rights. And then I have this action to actually commit that code, which is what happened earlier, because I probably never actually manually saved and formatted a file that we committed up. Running lint, markdown lint for my readmes, and then running test coverage and uploading it to code coverage. Okay, so let's go back here. Looks like that whole job passed. So that worked for that markdown fix. That's cool. let's see what Coderabbit gave us. This is see, it still wrote me a poem. I think we're still waiting for. Okay, so here's part of it. So it gives kind of a summary. It gives very specific file changes. It goes file by file on what was changed and or which file was changed and what was changed in it. I think this is a pretty good reason to keep your PR succinct, something I was great about. And then it gives us like this diagram of the changes that are made. These can be pretty complicated. It's just different ways to like visualize the changes. You can configure this, like if you set up Coderabbit, you can set like how what everything's doing and what it goes as related PRs if it wants. There's my poem. The other day it gave me a Star Wars one. I like that one. And then you kind of have to wait on it, and it will tell you when it's done at the bottom. So if this is still orange, you're still waiting on a full review. It's checked, like we're good. So normally what I find here is the nitpick comments. I find these really handy because they're the kind of thing that are like really annoying to leave to your teammate, and they're really annoying to receive from your teammate. But it's from an AI, you can actually determine if they're legit. So it was in pre-plugin curly MD. Okay, so that was, it hasn't actually caught up, so we delete that. But it caught on to consider whether this file is necessary. It appears to be original documentation, so all that was accurate. We caught that with our markdown lint, but this would have been really useful because I did not mean to commit that file. I did not check. And then fix markdown lint, maintain this file. We did that. It does not look like it caught the documentation error we slipped through there. It might have been because it was reviewing the first section or the first commit before. I wonder if I could refresh it. Either way, it's fine. I will just leave that for now. Check briefly, make sure I didn't leave anything else stupid in there. That's all right. All right, now we'll show with, if you use change sets, there's a default GitHub action that it sets up for you that you can publish in. So I have two. I have CI that runs basically on every push, and then this release one. I did customize it a bit with CI. I restored the cache, same thing. I don't run all the checks again, I just run the build. And what it does is, as we merge this PR, I'll go ahead and merge it. I'll approve my own code. Hitting the red button. And I'll merge it. And so now it's not going to release the package yet, it's going to create a PR to release the package. And that is pretty cool because that helps me set up more granular changes, which I think is really important as like, in the AI era, is like having really good Git hygiene, like having your commits be accurate and succinct, having your PRs be like actual features. I think it helps AI be more useful to you. And it's if you're doing a public package, it's really useful. So what it'll do, let me see if it already, so I already made a version package PR. So that release GitHub action, if it sees a change set, it adds it to this version packages PR. So it can see I'm releasing this package, I'm going to do a patch. I could add another feature to this. And if it was a minor, then it would bump this up to 0.3. If it was another patch, it would keep it at 0.4 and just add the patches to it. So I can keep adding to it if I'm not ready to release this yet, which I've done before. It's really, really handy. Whenever I am ready to release it, all it's going to do is it's going to delete that nonsense markdown file. It's going to append my change log and then change the version number in my package JSON. And that release, the same release GitHub Actions is going to publish that to NPM. And all you have to do for that is, man, GitHub really sucks. Okay, all it's going to do for that is, sorry, I'm so distracted by how horribly this works, zoomed in. Okay, so all you need for the published action is you just have to set up an auth token, well, a GitHub token and an NPM token. there's a GitHub Actions VS Code extension that will actually validate these if you're signed in, which is cool. So you can know in your IDE if you're doing it wrong. What I learned is you do want to do the change set publish instead of just button publish. Button publish will get it to NPM, but it won't create the release on GitHub, which is really handy. That's what all this nonsense does. I generated that with AI. And hopefully it's all done. And yeah, okay, so that was 0.2.4. See the latest is here. And I have a nice, pretty release file here. And this is what I mean. Okay, that actually did it okay. I thought it would include the commit where I bumped it, not where I actually added it. I think if I click here, yeah. So if I click on the commit, it adds the only one I bumped. I need to see if I can change that to the actual, I probably just need to squash my PRs and it might fix it. Okay, that is kind of like the workflow that I've like figured out for this package, working by myself, trying to keep like AI in line as much as possible. Let me see if I forgot anything on my list to talk about. No, that was pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, ideas based on that they want to bring up?
Use Cursor.
Oh, use Cursor. Until Cursor fixes Command K, I'm not interested. And actually, I am so overwhelmed by AI choice that when I find a tool that works, I don't worry about it. Like if I join a company that has like really extensive cursor rules and they have a cursor license, I'll use it. I'll figure out how to change my key bindings. But Windsurf has been really good to me. I've been using it about a month now. It's been really solid. So.
Did you use AI to write the CI?
I use AI to help me with the CI for sure, especially some of that complicated stuff with the release. Like I could not figure out the release. I really wanted, I don't know why I got fixated on this. I really wanted, like there's a packages thing here. For whatever reason, I thought that you could link your NPM to the packages here, but GitHub has its own packages like artifactory situation where you can publish to it instead of NPM, and that's what that's for. But it took me a while to figure out these releases. You can see I'm only on 6 here, and I've done a lot more bumps than that. It took me a while to actually figure that out. So I had to have AI help me with that. But it was very useful for like, I didn't know about change sets, and I was just like, hey, what is the best tool for managing package versions and a monorepo? And it was like, use change sets. And it was like, and then I was like, hey, how do I set up the CI? And it was like, oh, it already has a bot for that. That stuff was really useful. Actually, I still pay for the Claude like interface. I find it incredibly useful, and because I have a Logitech mouse, I got a pro subscription to Perplexity. I'm a huge fan of Perplexity. It's so good you don't even need to pay for it. The free is great. Anything you need live info for, like I want the latest info for, I go to Perplexity. I still need Google. People say they're not Google searching. I still need Google searches for error messages. Like if I have a very specific error message, Perplexity doesn't help, Claude doesn't help. It's like I know that 100,000 people have dealt with this error message. I just need Google to tell me what it is. I still use that for that. Perplexity is great for I need live info. I still use Claude for discussing strategy because even though I have access to Claude in Windsurf, their giant prompt is still like coming before whatever I tell Claude. So even if I want to talk to it in Windsurf, it's still going to start generating shit for me. So if I want to like talk strategy, I still use Claude. I really like their projects feature. I just realized this. If you ever use their projects, so you can link a GitHub repo. So I link that same repo, and I can refresh anytime. As long as you exclude the lock file and any images, it will fit in the context. Most repos will fit in the context. See, that whole project is 35% of its context. I can ask it questions about it. It doesn't maintain, like all these conversations are conversations I created off this chat. It doesn't know, it doesn't have enough context to know what I talked about in another conversation. But what I realized is you can export, you can tell it to summarize our conversation into Markdown, and then you can save it to the project. So I have a project for meal planning. That's actually maybe more than coding. The coolest thing I've done with AI is meal planning. I gave it this long prompt about what I want to eat every week. I want to eat paleo. My wife wants rice once a week. Give me 3 meals with leftovers and 40 grams of protein. And it gives me that every week. And it spits it out into this document. And every time it spits out a document, it's Markdown. So I tried to get it to give me a Word document so I could print it, but it gives me Markdown. And what's cool about it is, so you have this balsamic chicken spaghetti squash recipe it gave me. That's really good. I can just save it to, I can download it, or I can save it to the current project. And what's cool about that is now in context of the conversation. So when you have a conversation, you can have summarize your notes, add it to your project. You can kind of keep a flow going. Windsurf does, I'm sure Cursor does a very similar thing where they have a concept called memories. So when you ask it to do something like here, it saved a memory of adding that plugin. So it will remember the next time I want to add a prettier plugin, how I wanted to do it, how it did it last time, and that kind of thing. But it's not as good for conversations. I find that like most of my job now is not generating code, it's like strategizing on a project. I still just prefer the Cloud interface for that. It's like having a conversation with a coworker or a friend about like what I want to do. And I'm not allowed to use AI at my job, so I use Cloud. I mean, we're not like allowed to use like Copilot, Windsurf, Cursor, anything like that. So I use Claude, and I just upload the 2 or 3 files that are relevant, and then go from there. So I don't even remember what your original question was. I hope that got somewhere close. Anything else before I hand over to Roberto? Okay, cool. Thanks for listening to me rant.
All right, this project I want to show off real quick. If you joined us last month for the Meetup, February 19th, I showed off a CLI tool that I built. But before I go into it, in one day I built this thing out using AI, and then I refactored it. It took me about 2 days to refactor it with AI, and then I refactored it again, 3 weeks. Or now it's just continuously building it out. And even though AI did accelerate it and show the POC literally within 4 hours, the code was just junk. It's unmaintainable. And the architecture associated with it was, I didn't know what I was building a CLI tool, and I don't know how to create architecture with that. It's very different from building a web app tool, right? So AI helped me in so many ways to show this proof of concept, but it was absolutely a nightmare to maintain, to even grasp the architecture associated with it. And now this project is full blown, I don't know, 40K lines of code with like dozens of files associated with it and tests. But nonetheless, AI is totally integrated with my workflow. I use Cursor for everything. I use O3, Claude, and DeepSeek for a lot of my stuff. I don't just develop apps, I do a lot of database management, and so you will see different models perform differently. And so when I write a bunch of SQL, it's a hit or miss, especially when you're creating these huge long joins and functions, so on and so forth, right? So you got to test what works for your flow and stuff like that. So I think whatever the takeaway message is for tonight, experiment and find something that works for you. It's still pretty brand new. Everything's still pretty brand new. So last month, last events, I showed a CLI tool and I was calling it JSON to Next.js. And there's this, on the 19th was the event, and then on February 28th, right, I mentioned that the Next.js, right, if you don't build apps, right, don't build anything associated with React, just build APIs. Next.js is bloody awesome with that, right? Think about, I'm going to set up a node server with Express or Koa or Next.js or whatever framework you want to use, right? You can build with Next.js, and you don't have to worry about Express or any of that stuff, right? Because if you've written APIs for Next.js, you know all you have to do is specify a function called or a file called route.ts, and then the functions inside that route are your methods: get, post, put, patch, delete, right? And you're off to the races. And at the end of the day, right, you do npm build or next build, and then next or git push, right? Syncs it up to Vercel and it deploys it, and you're done, right? Everything is already built for you. Next.js is perfect for writing APIs, and on top of that, it's free. The free tier is very generous if you're just writing APIs. Very generous. And last month, I showcased like, hey, you know what? If your company's paying for mocking servers, you're wasting money, because you can use Next.js to do your mocks for you, right? And we'll show what else you can do with it. Again, with just using Next.js. So it doesn't matter if you hate Next.js because of whatever it is. It's great for just building APIs. Super great. But on the February 28th, Guillermo posted this on Twitter, and I was like, holy shit, okay. So the message got out. Like, he's saying, like, yeah, API framework, whatever, right? But I've been using Next.js for almost like 5 years, and I've met no one who's only used Next.js just for APIs. No one. But they're trying to promote it as this API thing, and it's cool and everything. But if you ever go to this webpage and their blog post, and you try npmx create next -- API, it's literally creating an app and just deleting the layout, the CSS, and the pages that you get for free using Next.js without the -- API. So they provide nothing new besides removing those folders for you and being like, hey, now you're ready to write APIs. Cool, right? Anyways, I'm glad the word is out. You should be using, if you're just writing APIs, right, this is super, stupid simple. But what I want to talk to you about is, we just have to write code, right? Before I get into that, another thing too that popped up on my LinkedIn was this individual was selling a course online on product management, specifically product management on APIs. And the course, it's like $500, right? It's geared toward product managers, and it has all these fancy slides in it. And you see something like this, and you know, someone like yourself, like myself, someone that's in the weeds and building these things out, you know, day in and day out, building APIs, connecting to front end clients, and so on and so forth. You look at this, and this is completely managerial, right? High level, like, what are you talking about? Type of thing. It's like, oh, okay. So when you think about API lifecycle, these are all the things that happen to it. But when you're in the weeds, this has nothing to do with any of that, right? Like, you're just building the API, you're spinning up your ORMs, connecting the driver, connecting to Mongo, you're doing validation. Is the API being deployed? Who did I go talk to about being deployed? Like, none of this comes to mind. The thing that really brought my attention was, look how fat that arrows, or how many arrows there are to do something, right? To deploy an API. That's time. And that's time, that's money, right? time to delivery, experimentation on an API that you have no idea is going to make money for your company, if anybody's going to be using it, right? No idea. Wouldn't it be nice if you obliterated everything else and just kept like, yeah, you have to operate it for sure, right? Observability, security, and analyze, right? Is my API being used? And so if you think about it like this, it's like, what can we use, what can be built that will strip away everything else associated with building an API and really just come down to like, look, I did it in 2 seconds. Here's the dashboard to analyze or to observe the API. If you want to analyze it, blah, blah, whatever, right? And the idea is that in the age of AI, and maybe not even AI, right? Because I started this project before AI was around, or like it's hot. But a lot of the stuff that we do when we build APIs can be automated. And that was kind of like the thought and the thread that I pulled and pulled and pulled and built this thing out. And using AI just really just made it a lot faster. And so this project, I renamed it. I called it API Mech. It's just mechanized API queries. And the idea behind it is having you drop in a package on your terminal that helps you, right? That has a lot of automation involved in it, and it has AI in it. You don't have to use AI. But the automation there to help you build these APIs super, super fast. And I wanted it to be declarative. So if you've ever done like Kubernetes or any of these CI/CD, DevOps stuff, right? They always talk about declarative configurations, YAML, JSON schema, so on and so forth. I kind of want to borrow that concept and idea to building APIs. If you already heard of an open API spec, right? Kind of the same idea. And one of the things that you repeatedly do over and over again when you write APIs is like, okay, I got to set up an echo, maybe I have to stub it out, right? Mock, and then I add some other stuff to it: query, manual, eject, which I'll get into it. But usually at this point, you bring in a tool to help you manage and maintain your APIs, kind of like Postman. And now you have QA involved, and they want to write tests. If something breaks, who's responsible for the test? How can we detect the test? How can we fix the test before they get out to our clients and our customers? And that's all great and dandy, but none of those things are going to help you if someone, the VP engineering, goes to your database and changes a column and doesn't tell anybody, right? And then from everything from the data source down, it's completely wiped out, broken. No one's know what the hell's going on because this one individual changed something at your source, right? And if you write your ORMs and you don't validate the data coming from your data source, right, you'll never ever detect that. And it'll crash your servers if you don't do like exception handling correctly. It destroys your kind of like your mojo with your customers, your clients, right? Your trust is being like, hey, you broke my API. Why are you breaking my API for? Another thing too is because you're on the Next.js platform, right? If you use Vercel, you can deploy it to Vercel. You can deploy it to an environment. You can add everything associated with Vercel to your APIs. And so this API Mech is a command line tool I've been working on, relatively new. It's an alpha right now. I'm looking for testers, but I want to show you the idea behind it. And so, I don't know if you can see that. Let me zoom in a little bit. Or is that good? No, zoom in a little bit. Right. It's simple API Mech, and they use the server command. Apply, watch, generate OpenAI. Generate API, and then the AI bot is going to help you. The idea behind it, think about it like this: it's a mech. Like in Star Wars, they have these astromechs like R2D2 and a slew of other ones, right? The mech is there to help the pilot in theory, right? They sit in the X-wing or whatever fighter plane, right? And they're there to do something besides beep and whistle. The same spirit is like, I'm just gonna drop in this mech into my Next.js project, and I'm gonna let it do its thing. And then when I'm tired of it, I'm gonna inject it out of it, so I can come back in control, right? And it's all about code, right? It's all about code. I'm a developer. I want to write code, but sometimes I don't. So let's just get started real quick to show you like what do you mean by a declarative configuration file. So provide an example configuration of response mode echo with get method on a path API use items. Use item. Right? So this is using OpenAI in the background. It's using the latest API they just released, the responses API. It's using vector search, so it fed a bunch of documents, it's going through it, and it generated this JSON schema. I don't know if you can see it at the very bottom. And it's asking me, do you want to save this configuration? So let's go ahead and save it. Right? It's called API Mech JSON, and on your left here is the very bare minimums to get this thing going. And so what that means is that now that this is out, the declarative configuration, I'm going to exit the AI and I'm going to apply the file. Right? Apply the file called API-mech.json. It's going to do a bunch of stuff in the background. Gives me a nice little message. You can see it there. Oh, wait, yeah, I guess that's the very bottom. Applying API Mech configuration. It's in the Next.js directory. Sources, app, API, news item, right? Because Next.js is file-based routing. And so we come here, we check it out. News item. It created the route.ts file for me. It created the code necessary to make this to work, right? The function get request. And I want to go ahead and just like run it, right? So execute. So it's going to run it again. This time it's going to build. So it already built the API, right? Now it's just going to call it. It's going to call it for me. And because it's an echo, this is what it returns. It just returns an echo of what I gave it, right? So now it's up live, and I can do next build, npm or git push, and I'm off to the races, right? 2 seconds. Great, but that's just an echo. All right, so this is hash. AI again, to provide one, to provide an example configuration for mock response on get method or with get method on /API news item. And so it's going to provide another JSON schema for me. And the thing is, you don't have to do this. I have a bunch of README documentation. And also, I do automatic tests to make sure that the configuration is legit. Right. So now it spits out this JSON schema with the response key, response mode mop, sample size, right? Because when you're mocking, you have an array, you want to test for 100 elements in the array, or you want to test for like 2 elements, right? It gives them options. A 200 response code, right? It gives me a successfully fetched data description, and then if you've done OpenAPI, right? This looks very familiar. But here's the pudding, right? It's a schema. My API has this schema. It's going to be an object. Sorry, it's properties, right? It's going to have a data sticking out of it, and it's going to be an array. And the array is going to have a bunch of items. In this case, it's ID, title, and description. But let's go ahead and change that to news item, ID, news title, and news description. Okay, cool. And everything's required. right? You come down here. Right. Again, if you're familiar with JSON schema, this is all good. If you're not, bust out your AI. Hey, buddy, what is JSON schema? Right? Let him learn something new. It's very trivial to ask Claude or DeepSeek or whoever you want to ask, right, to explain to you what JSON schema is, how this declarative file is JSON schema, and so on and so forth, right? Use AI to help you learn. So now we have that mock, right? Let's exit out of here and let's apply it. And then execute it. So I just created a mock, spit out all that code for me, which I didn't write, right? Using Faker in the background, a sample size of 10, and right now I'm ready to go. Git commit, npm build, whatever you have, you're off to the races. Now, one of the commands was generate a API Mac, generate open API spec, right? Documentation. We all want documentation for our stuff. It's going to go through your Next.js file folder, right? And find all the API Mac configurations per route and build a open API. If you're familiar with open API spec, right, with all your routes associated with it. Again, you don't have to sit there and write it and learn open API, but if you do have an open API.json file, one of the benefits of it is that you can automatically get documentation, right? So not only do you have you building out your APIs, it's automatically documenting them for you. And so we're at API matches, right? Again, it's running the server in the background, and if you publish this on npm, you share around with your team members, your group, your product managers, whoever's involved, right, the stakeholders, can come out here and start testing this out. Again, no one's writing any code, right? This, all you're doing is maintaining a configuration file for your API. Now, how is this different from all the open API codegen tools out there? Well, the reason I got me started this path wasn't just writing another codegen tool. It was actually trying to get rid of the ORM. And if you're in the industry for a very long time, someone told me this when I started off, and I'll pass on the information as well. It's just learn SQL. It's everywhere. And if you're just stuck in one position, like front-end development, I get it. You probably never experienced or know SQL. But if you're a developer who wants to test different things, move around, different teams, and explore different technologies, SQL is just everywhere. And a good idea to learn SQL is that a lot of business analysts or financial analysts know SQL. A lot of people they know Excel and SQL pretty well. They know SQL because of Microsoft SQL. And so those guys, if you're ever in charge, if you're tasked to build APIs for one of these people, they will write you the SQL. And then if you don't know the SQL, you're going to have to translate that SQL to your ORM. Go ahead. It's great exercise. You really will get to know Next, K-N-E-X.js, or whatever ORM you're using, right? Until another project, you have to relearn another ORM because they don't use your particular ORM. Anyways, the idea was like, hey, if you write SQL and you just want to connect it to your API, this tool is for you. And by that I mean, API Mac, let's ask it to provide an example of response mode query with get method on API news item. Right, it's going to go talk to the vector database, whatever it is, whatever AI is doing. It's going to generate another declarative file for me. Again, if you don't know anything about this, it doesn't matter, right? Just ask AI to guide you to do this. Save the file, yes, please. So one thing that the AI does is if it generates junk data, it calls a tool called validate. So AI will self-check itself. This is what it's spitting out. It's spitting out the errors. Hey, I fucked up. I'm doing something wrong here. Make sure you read the configuration file. And lo and behold, it tells you where the error is. Anyways, copy paste that over there. Response mode is query. The operation is get use item, the path, and storing of parameters in here, right? A question mark, limit equals some integer. It's not required. The response is 200 again. The we have news item ID, title, link. Okay, sure. Let's just keep that. We'll actually let's just get rid of this as well. Let's keep it simple. Title. Right? We're building out the API. What's the payload back? Right? This is the contract. And then we come here to the query section of it, where it says query this key. This is a description of the query that you're trying to build. Right? You need a name for it, just like you do with the operations ID. So imagine you're writing an RM and you're attaching this query call to it. You want to name that function something, right? Select my items or something. In this case, the name is that function name, select use item. We're going to attach a query file to it. It's running Postgres. In that file, it's going to use a parameter called query, right? You're going to pass in that query into the file. And then there's the output stuff, and then there's validation true, right? To validate. I want to ignore this here for false. Select limit. And then I'm going to switch over to the query.sql, right? This is where I'm going to write my query. And it's very basic. Use item. Let me make it. You know what? Link. So one thing that this is opinionated, right, is that because you're going to attach a query to it, the response of that API has to be the same structure as the query, right? It's not that much of a stretch. It is an opinion, but just to make it solidified, is that the response, 200 response has to be the exact structure of the query output. Now, if you've ever done ID work, right, there's already tools, like VS Code already has these tools called SQL tools that help you run these things over and over again. And so usually if you're on an ORM, you probably have to go to like a database client and check like, okay, I want to check out certain tables, certain documents. If you're in Mongo, NoSQL, right? You're going to run certain commands to see the data back, and then you're going to go to your ORM and then code it up, right? In this case, it's the SQL query and it generates. So this tool that VS Code provides is you run the query and it generates like the table. It's like a database client. And just to make sure it's working, okay, 10 to 1. So I'm just going to save it and then I'm going to apply it. Right, and I'm going to apply it and I'm going to call it, right, the --ex. You can see that. Oh, okay, validation. Linda must have required. Okay, so it comes over here, gives me some notes on. Okay. This has to be true. Right, okay, let's try that. And there's an error associated with that. And so, if we come here, let's come get rid of it. There's no query. Get rid of the query. Required. Solve. Run it again. Right. So now I actually connect to the database, ran this query to the database, and pipe into the API. And so if I go to the document and just execute it, you see the data there, right? So now, as a developer, all I have to do is worry about writing the query. So let's get rid of this, or actually just change it and see what it does, right? And run it again. And so, as you can see, the payload coming back from the database is with what I'm doing, right? But it's kind of a pain running, apply. So in dev mode, what you want to do is just watch, right? So every time you change something, it automatically runs it for you. You save it, it runs it for you, spits out the data, right? So now you only work on these two fields. There's no going in there and writing code to RM to check this, check that, connect to the database, right? This is just flowing. You're just vibing, I suppose, right? Now, earlier we removed that parameters, and this last thing I'll show is that I want to add a limit parameter, right? Query parameters limit, right? So this should throw an error, yeah. The error is telling me like, hey, you're writing a SQL query that has this query parameters associated with it, but in your file, your declaration file, there's no parameter associated with your query. So add one to it. That's kind of the error is telling you, right? It's helping you guide. So we got to tell the machine like, hey, look, I want to write a query. Parameters. I'm gonna call it query, right? Coming from the query, and it's gonna call limit. And then here, hopefully limit inquiry true. Let's see if that works. No, it doesn't. Okay. Oh, right. Thanks. That's server. That should do it. Guess not. Damn it. No. Ah, I see why. It has. There it is. So one thing that building this thing out, OpenAPI has specific key names that are not part of the JSON spec, right? OpenAPI is an extension of it. And so they have a lot of keywords that they use for API documentation that JSON schema and the validators for JSON schema do not recognize, and they'll throw errors associated with it. I was using a keyword called example, and the validator that I'm using doesn't know what to do with this thing, right? It's not part of the JSON schema spec. Anyways, so I wrote this query and I started passing in API parameters into the query so that when at runtime, they get passed into it, right? So now you can write all these parameters associated with like inserts, think about inserts, joins, right? You join multiple tables and so on and so forth. And these parameters are in the query, they're in the path, it can be cookies, it can be headers, right? Anything associated with an API can be passed into the SQL query itself. Now, this example is SQL query, but it doesn't have to be. It could be Mongo query. It could be Excel, spreadsheets. Like, whatever your source of data is, it can be mapped into it. Right? It has nothing to do with SQL whatsoever. SQL is just something that I like to do. Right? It's the language that I know. But I want to add a limit of, another thing too is, when I call that API, oops, wrong one. This API, this route, it gets built, right? I wrote a generator that'll read the configuration and generate these routes for you automatically. And so in this case, the API is being called with limit of 10. But because it's not fixed, right? If I run it again and again and again, it'll change the limit, right? So if I'm testing this thing out, one other thing too is I have to work on it, but generate those API documentation again, refresh that page, and just start hitting this API, right? So it's always working, and then you can just build it, deploy it, wherever you have, right? So building, ideation, designing APIs is really, really dirt cheap to do with the API Mac, right? And once it's done, it's done. Once your query is set. The thing is, even if you don't know, like, right, SQL, you know, just go again, ask your AI buddy to help you out with your SQL query. Like, hey man, I have these two tables. I need to join them together. Generate the SQL for me, right? And you can start playing around with it. One last thing I wanted to show is, or if you think about it, so now fast forward to React. Think about React server components. When you write a React server component, these actions, you're not writing paths. You're not writing HTTP requests. There's no fetching, right? All you're doing is writing a file, a function in that file, using use server at the very top or whatever. You're using Zod or some kind of validator, right? And Next.js or React, right, is going to take that and generate those routes for you. But that route, if you ever look at it in the developer tools, is just a long string of like hash, right? It's like a get to some really long string of hash. So it really brings up the question, like, why does the path have to be pretty? Wouldn't it be cool if you just like turn it off? Like, who cares? I want you to generate a function for me. And I want to go to my React application. I want to import it, right? An SDK. And I want to start calling that function. And that function is going to call this API for me automatically, right? So now, I don't really care if it's sort of action or not. I'm just going to write it because at the end of the day, I'm going to use Next.js file path routing for it. And the only difference is your route is going to look like garbage, but it's going to be a hash, right? So in this case, we'll just use this guy here. But it really is going to look like some random hash, right? And this hash is going to be that call from your front-end React component calling the server component, right? And all I did is take the idea of React server component and say, all right, fuck the path. Who cares about the path? The front-end developer, back-end developer, or a front-end developer, UI developer. I don't want to spend time writing or talking to back-end people to create contracts, right? I just want to execute this query so that I can just fetch the data and populate the component and serve it back into the front end and off to the races, right? I don't want to sit down in another meeting talking about path, contract, this, and that, right? And so that's the next step. If you think about it, API development should be like the least of your concerns, or anybody's concerns. It should be automated. It's a pattern that's been around since, I don't know, the 70s, 60s, where machines talking to machines are written on APIs. So if you think about it, this is a really great tool for development. But what about for your business analyst friends, non-developers? Wouldn't it be cool to have a UI that does exactly this, but manages your APIs, right? That saves your queries for you, manages your queries, has observability, has built-in security and access controls, right? All that in this UI. And so the UI I'll be showcasing next month, but that CLI tool is embedded in the UI as well. And so now, who cares about terminals and CI, stuff like that, right? Anybody who should be able to write any type of endpoint that they prefer, right? Even if it's just like garbage, right? And you'll be able to choose, hey, I want a REST endpoint, or I want this to be a server action endpoint, right? And as you as a user of Next.js, it has to be Next.js right now because I don't know other frameworks are supporting React server components, but you get the point, right? Okay. This should be cheap. This should not take days, weeks, literally seconds to build these things out. Anyways, thanks for listening for my rant. I hope get some feedback. I'm looking for alpha testers to help me finish up the CLI tool. Any questions?
I do have one quick question.
Sure.
I do a lot of work with like integrating with third-party APIs, right? Like you did say you can go from the mech to the open API, but a lot of times I need to integrate again with a third party. They provide an open API spec. So do you have a way or plan a way to import an open API spec and then convert that to the API mech?
So right now, I was going to show you an example of that. Right. And one of the examples I wanted to show was like you can just copy data, right, coming from an API, like your third-party API.
Right.
And if it doesn't have an open API spec, AI will generate a spec for you. And once you have that spec, once you have that JSON spec, you paste it into the schema. Literally copy and paste it. You just have to tell it, provide the structure, which is open API structure, and to run it, it'll do it for you.
Okay.
Now, open API is documentation of many APIs. And they have some other ones called like Turborepo that's coming out that focuses on other parts of the API. There's another product of open API coming out too. Basically, what I wanted to focus on is one API only. I just want spec of one API because then from one API I can derive everything else on top of it.
Right.
So actually, the thing that took me one day to do was ingesting an open API spec file and generating the routes, like I just showed. But it takes all those routes and generates it. But the problem with open API spec is that there's so many versions. That you can pollute it. And so at the end of the day, you have a validator that's like 1,200 lines of code just checking to make sure that it's like on spec. And there's like Swagger stuff, like OpenAPI 3.0, 3.1. It gets really dirty really fast. And so I had a CLI tool for that. I removed it because it was just a nightmare to maintain. Every API that I ran, OpenAPI spec that I ran to showcase, like, hey, you can just upload a OpenAPI spec and look at it. Always causing trouble, always, because they're just so random. And so, I don't know, I got a question too, like, how is it different from OpenAPI? Why not just use the OpenAPI? It just sucks. I'm sorry, it's so hard. It's just so hard to do it. And like those guys who do Cogen with OpenAPI, you know, God bless them, because that's a lot of pain to do. And I didn't want to go that route. I don't want to go that route. But, so, just to finish up the question, if you look at the code that's generated, right, and part of the response mode is eject. And what I mean by eject, if you eject, you can come in, you can come to this code. Here's the database call. Right, you can see that. You can remove it and add your own fetch, whatever it is, right? And then run it as regular code. The only difference is the bot is going to completely ignore this file. It's not going to do anything with it. It's going to ignore the configuration file. It's going to ignore the query file, right? Because it generated everything else for you, like the validation, but you want to add your own third-party fetches, go ahead, right? You just eject it, and then you're off to the races. You can go back to your own workflow.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah. Right. That's part of the motivation is like, I still want control. I want manual control, and sometimes I don't want their boss help because some things are very complicated. And so I want to provide that option as well, right? Which the responsibility of eject and manual will get you there. Cool. Let's continue the conversation downstairs. Don't forget parking ticket, please. Right? Thank you so much for coming out tonight. See you next month. Yeah, man. Yeah.
What's your name, man? Neil and Nathan.
Yeah.
Thanks for the questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've used Windsurf before, actually. Yeah, I kind of ran it for just like just a tiny.
Right.
And their friends.
Oh yeah.
What's really using that stuff? I definitely. I'm sure like whatever company I join next will probably be using that.
I've seen them use
Oh yeah.
Okay, there we go. Oh, that's a little embarrassing. That looks weird. I think it's fine, but it looks weird. One handle sits at one. That one over there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Hey folks, real quick, we gotta get out of here. It's already 8 o'clock. Let's go downstairs.